It was the last night of the carnival in the small town of Millsbrook, overshadowed by the skeletal silhouette of abandoned warehouses and the dying cinder of a once thriving freight line. Eager curiosity lingered in the cold autumn air, swirling around flickering street lamps that cast elongated shadows across the muddy fairground. Locals whispered that this carnival arrived every decade, always unannounced, and left behind a faint tang of regret and unanswered question. Crisp leaves rustled beneath trudging feet, a choir of uneasy hush. Families, bored teenagers, and the occasional traveling stranger approached the garish lights with a mixture of nervous anticipation and curiosity. No one dared to say out loud how the calliope music, keening softly in the air, sounded like the wail of something hunting in the darkness. Jonas stepped onto the carnival grounds with a nervous excitement that tiptoed along the edge of dread. He clutched a battered leather notebook, hoping to record every oddity and spectacle he found. For years, he'd read about traveling circuses that defied the ordinary, from giant cat wrestlers to so-called witches performing psychic illusions. Yet something about this carnival felt peculiarly sinister. The rickety booths creaked like gnarled bones, and overhead, bunting made of tattered fabric drifted in the damp breeze. The air smelled of stale popcorn, wet hay, and something sour beneath that, like old meat left in the sun too long. A sign, battered by countless storms, read, "Beware all ye who enter. Our sideshow welcomes the bravest hearts." Unable to resist, Jonas followed the swirling crowd and stepped inside. A gaunt man with sunken eyes sold tickets at the entrance. His face was powdered white, exaggerating the hollows of his cheeks and giving him the look of a half-starved specter. With a sweeping gesture, he greeted Jonas and the other visitors, his voice quivering between nervousness and delight. "Welcome, my dear friends, to a night of marvels and mysteries. Please, enjoy all we have to offer, but do keep your wits about you." Jonas noticed the man's bony hands trembling when he tore off each ticket stub. After crossing a threshold of rotting boards, Jonas found himself engulfed in a swirl of colored lights and swirling shapes. Vibrant banners promised illusions, contortionists, freakish anomalies. The biggest attraction, or so the placards claimed, was the Chameleon A performer who defied classification. The first performance Jonas witnessed was a mesmerizing act involving a fire eater clad in shimmering black and crimson. He danced fluidly, regurgitating flames that licked the sky. Drums pounded, and the flickering fire painted infernal shapes onto the onlookers' wide-eyed faces. Jonas scribbled hurried notes, transfixed by the artistry and danger. But beyond the alluring spectacle, his gaze wandered to the fringes of the stage, where a dark figure stood nearly still, watching the crowd. This figure was tall and lean, draped in an oversized coat and wearing a battered fedora. Something about that presence unsettled Jonas. He couldn't discern any features beneath the brim, only a suggestion of a sly smile lingering in the shadow. Goosebumps prickled across his neck, but the performance ended abruptly and the crowd dispersed to the next tent. He wandered the carnival, drawn by the sound of flutes and dissonant violins. In a crimson and gold-striped tent, an illusionist made a woman float mid-air before slicing her silhouette with a whispered incantation. In another corner, a heavily muscled man folded iron bars into the shape of pretzels, yet Jonas felt a pull deeper into the labyrinth, beyond the main attractions. There were smaller, less garish tents that promised contraband curiosities and unearthly wonders. He passed a caged mermaid prop, obviously rigged with wires but more lifelike than he expected. A hairy-limbed creature was behind another glass display, its name scrawled on an unreadable placard. Eventually, Jonas arrived at a blackened tent, emanating a dull glow. The sign above read, "Chameleon's Lair. Dare you witness the impossible?" Inside, the air was stifling, tinged with incense and a heavy musk that reminded Jonas more of predator cages at a zoo than any performance stage. Wooden benches circled a small platform, lit by a solitary spotlight. The crowd hushed the moment Jonas slipped in. He took a seat in the back, half expecting disappointment, but the atmosphere crackled with an anticipation so palpable it felt like static on his skin. Then the ringmaster stepped forward, a tall, wiry man with twisted mustaches and a wide grin that seemed to strain at the corners of his mouth. His voice resounded, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to bear witness to the chameleon, our star attraction, our walking impossibility." He bowed with a flourish, stepping aside as the figure in the oversized coat emerged. The performer removed the fedora, revealing a face that slid between boyish youth and haggard age in the lantern's flick. One moment the features were smooth-cheeked, the next carved by time's chisel. Gasps erupted from the audience, some half convinced it was an elaborate projection. But Jonas saw it clearly. The flesh itself shifted and reformed, moment to moment, as if it could not decide on a single shape. The performer's eyes seemed to multiply and vanish in a blur, occasionally settling on a pale green hue that glowed like phosphorescent moth. The ringmaster explained that the chameleon was unlike anything on earth, a living contradiction of nature and magic. He commanded the performer to demonstrate a shift, and sure enough, the figure melted like wax into an exact replica of the ringmaster's own form. Amid stunned applause, Jonas heard the quiet pop and crackle of shifting bones. The chameleon took on the shape of a small child, then an elderly woman, then an elegant nobleman from centuries past. Each transformation was as smooth as a ripple across water. Some members of the audience, too petrified to hide their discomfort, slid back in their seats. Others pressed forward, enthralled by the spectacle. There was a fleeting moment when the performer locked eyes with Jonas, and Jonas felt a cold dread seep into his heart. It was as though a primal knowledge passed from those unsettling eyes to his own soul, whispering that this was no mere parlor trick. The shapes might be illusions, but the force behind them was undeniably real and frighteningly dangerous. That night, after the performance concluded, Jonas lingered in the tent's shadows, hoping to study the chameleon more closely. Most of the crowd left, buzzing with excitement. A few carnival workers packed up equipment and snuffed out lanterns. Yet, near the backstage area, Jonas caught a glimpse of movement. He crept around fraying canvas dividers until he saw the oversized coat and battered fedora placed neatly on a crate. Two figures stood in conversation, the ringmaster and the performer, though the latter now appeared in the shape of an ordinary teenage boy. Jonas strained to hear. Their tones were hushed, urgent. The ringmaster seemed to be fuming, gesturing wildly. The performer merely nodded, as if pacifying a caged beast within. Jonas couldn't catch specific words, but fear coiled in his gut. Unwilling to risk discovery, Jonas retreated and wandered the winding paths. The carnival had grown eerily quiet. A single calliope tune, stuttering like a broken lullaby, floated through the stillness. He noticed a group of excited patrons stumbling out of another tent, full of giddy laughter and cheap beer. Just as Jonas was about to rejoin the main footpath, he heard a throat-ripping scream behind a storage trailer. His heart thundered. He rushed toward the sound, rounding the corner, only to find moonlit emptiness and scattered footprints. Then, from behind a stack of boxes, came a guttural snarl. Jonas's breath caught in his chest. He peered around the crates to see a horrifying sight. A twisting, shapeless form hunched over a motionless body. The scent of fresh blood tainted the air. Paralyzed with terror, Jonas watched the shapes convulse. One moment, the figure was elongated, almost serpentine. The next, it resembled a Hulk-like monstrosity with gruesome limbs. Jonas could hear the sickening crunch of bones. Yet, among the horror, he recognized flashes of the chameleon's earlier forms. The child's face contorted in a silent scream, the ringmaster's twisted grin, the teenage boy's wide eyes. The shifting figure hunched over its prey, devouring with ravenous hunger. Nausea churned in Jonas's gut as he realized that the thing was feeding on a carnival visitor, one of the men who had just left the bar tent a few minutes earlier. A wave of dizziness struck him, The shapeless creature lifted its head, catching Jonas's reflection in the pale moonlight, and let out a hiss that echoed like living nightmares. Fear overrode any sense of curiosity. Jonas fled, stumbling through tangled wires and rotted boards, nearly twisting an ankle as he raced for the carnival gate. His mind swirled with the vision of that feeding frenzy. He could almost taste the metallic tang of blood in the air. His only thought was escape. Warn the townsfolk, call the police, do something. But the exit gates were locked tight, and the ticket booth was abandoned. Overhead, the sky loomed, moon covered by swirling clouds. The entire carnival felt like a labyrinth, with shifting signs, twisting corridors, tents that seemed to appear and vanish. Distant calliope music rolled in, more sinister than ever. Jonas's chest tightened in panic. Perhaps he should have screamed for help, but instincts told him the carnival workers were either complicit in the horror or too terrified themselves to intervene. Desperate and shivering, Jonas realized his best chance was to hide until morning, when the carnival would presumably break camp and leave. If he survived the night, he could notify the authorities before the troops sank back into obscurity. Finding refuge in a shuttered photo booth, Jonas pressed himself against the cracked wooden panels, heart hammering. The next few hours trickled by in excruciating increments. He dozed off, awakened periodically by distant screeches and the faint crunch of footsteps. More screams tore through the silence, then quickly died out. Every time, Jonas's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't bear to picture what was happening. He wondered how the carnival had stayed hidden for so long if this monstrous phenomenon happened each time they set up shop. The first pale stretch of dawn light filtered through the cracks in the booth. Jonas mustered courage to peek outside. The carnival grounds were almost silent, save for a few workers methodically dismantling tents. The ringmaster and the same gaunt ticket seller supervised. No trace of terror or gore lingered on the grounds, only puddles of muddy water and strewn confetti. Jonas crept closer, holding his breath. He spotted the chameleon near a half-camas-calased display meant to look like a giant balloon cage. Its face was expressionless, wearing a shape that looked almost human, though unnervingly bland, like a mannequin. Jonas felt cold indignation flare in his gut. How many lives had been consumed last night? He needed evidence to reveal the carnival's monstrous secret. Moving quickly and quietly, Jonas reached into his pack for a small camera he'd planned to use for capturing harmless spectacles. He snapped several shaky shots of the chameleon, the carnival workers, and anything that might prove the previous night's horrors. An unspoken tension rippled among the carnies, some exchanging frightened glances. Jonas realized the performers were little more than prisoners to this traveling nightmare. Perhaps the ringmaster held them under some dark pact they could not escape. As Jonas lined up another snapshot, the ringmaster's eyes locked onto him. A wide grin spread across the ringmaster's face. Too large, too knowing. Jonas felt a chill slice through him like a blade. Before Jonas could retreat, the ringmaster clapped his hands, instantly commanding every worker's attention. "Gather around," the ringmaster called. "We have one last private performance." Jonas felt an icy dread as the chameleon sauntered forward, still wearing its unsettlingly featureless visage. The ringmaster's voice dropped low, dripping with menace. "You've trespassed behind the curtain," he said to Jonas. "The carnival has secrets. Secrets that must remain hidden." Jonas tried to run, but his legs refused to move. A crushing weight seemed to clamp down on his muscles, as if he were pinned in place by the ringmaster's will alone. In the next heartbeat, the chameleon's body shimmered like rippling water. Its skin stretched, bubbled, then reformed into the monstrous shape Jonas had glimpsed the night before. Grotesquely elongated limbs and a maw lined with needle-like teeth. A harsh hiss reverberated in his ears, and Jonas realized this was the end. Panic flared, and in a last desperate act, he lifted the camera, triggering the flash. The strobe of light struck the chameleon's many-colored eyes, stunning it momentarily. Jonas felt the invisible force lift, Stumbling free, he shoved past stunned carnival workers and sprinted for the gates. The ringmaster's roar echoed behind him, ordering them to stop him at all costs. He tumbled through the maze of half-camased booths, ducking lamps and crates until he reached the chained gates. Frantically, he spotted a rusted crowbar on the ground. The chameleon's wet snarls grew closer, accompanied by the ringmaster's furious command. Jonas pried at the chain, ignoring the raw ache in his arms. On the third heave, the lock broke, and the gate screeched open. Jonas hurled himself out, lungs burning, and fled into the gray dawn. It felt as though every remaining shadow of the carnival reached for him, hungry to drag him back. He ran until his legs gave out behind a deserted warehouse, breath ragged and heart hammering. With trembling fingers, he called the authorities. By the time they arrived, the carnival was gone. All that remained were scattered footprints and ruts in the mud where tents and trailers had been. No ringmaster. No living nightmare. No evidence beyond Jonah's blood-spattered jacket and a handful of blurry photographs. Though the officers took his report, their expressions revealed doubt and mild pity. They suggested exhaustion or hallucination. Jonas could only look at them with haunted eyes. He knew what he had witnessed was real. As the sun inched higher, casting weak light over the desolate fairground, Jonas stood there shaking, camera in hand. He stared beyond the vacant lot, heart pounding with the memory of that shape-shifting fiend. He vowed that this would not be the end. The carnival might vanish into the highways and back roads, but Jonas's resolve remained. Somewhere, the chameleon would perform again, luring unsuspecting audiences to a feast of nightmares. Jonas would gather more proof. He would not let the truth be swallowed by the darkness. Each breath steadied his trembling limbs. Somewhere, Calliope music echoed on the wind, a final mocking note from the carnival that had consumed so many souls. And then, like a dying sigh, it vanished.